People believe that success in sales has to come at a cost. Burnout, imposter syndrome, and that feeling that you're performing more than you're actually leading. But what if playing big didn't mean losing yourself in the process? Today, I'm joined by Kristi Straw, leadership coach and author of Unicorn Leader, to explore the subtle mindset traps that keep sales leaders stuck and how to step into authentic, soul-aligned leadership that actually works. Kristi, welcome to the show. I just have to say, I love you. I love your energy. Just we've gotten to already engage a little bit. I came on your show recently, and I have been so excited to have you on just to share more about your framework, more about what you teach in terms of soul aligned leadership. I think that that's something that probably every listener of this show is wanting to learn how to tap into, whether they're leading themselves, leading a team, or maybe they have aspirations of leadership. So, welcome. I am so excited to have you, and I'd love to just give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, the work that you do. I know you're also a mom of three, so shout out to you doing this while taking care of the babies. So much respect. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about who you are and just introduce you to the audience to start.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Elise. It is a pleasure to be here. Obviously, loved having you on my show as well. So thank you for that. And you know what you said in the intro really hits home for me because I too have lived a version of success that looked really shiny from the outside, but felt somewhat hollow on the inside. I've led high stakes teams, I've hit all the sales targets, but quietly, really, I was unraveling. And it wasn't until I really stopped performing and started leading from a place of authentic authority and from my values that I saw the shift. So, not just in results, but in my own energy, right? And honestly, my sense of peace. And so that's why I created the Unicorn Leader Framework, which is a high EQ leadership framework. And the reason I did so was because we don't need more top high flying sales performers who are burning out. We need more leaders who are aligned and awake and anchored really in who they are and in their value system.
Mm. You spoke about and you said something there that I want to go a little bit deeper into, which is performing versus leading with our values and leading authentically. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, first it stems from something really personal and the fact that leadership to me is super personal. And so founding Lighthouse Leadership Consultants was born from a personal reckoning is like what I tell people, right?
Mm.
I saw the toxic environments. I watched multifaceted talented women shrink or shut down and realizing ultimately that somebody was going to have to rewrite the playbook. And so I decided really to be, the change that I wanted to see, to hearken some Barack Obama in here. And so that really was what creating leadership framework was about. That's what it was about for me, finding peace and really recognizing that there's a different way to be, there's a different way to lead, and there's a different energy from which I'm going to have to operate from in order to go this next part of the journey.
Makes total sense. How do we know if we're performing? I'm curious your take on that. If someone's listening to this and they're like, "Okay, I I think I get it," but
Yes.
how do we know if we are?
I yeah, I think we know, and I always know I'm performing when I'm not I feel a little disassociated from what I'm saying. So
Mm.
for me, if I'm in a room and I'm really keynoting on something that is super exciting and that I'm really pumped up about. So for instance, I just got back from Baltimore training an organization on bias and stigma around mental health and microaggressions in the workplace. That's a very different experience than keynoting, hey, this is how you take up space and how you have your own brand. And so I notice for myself that when I feel that I'm performing, I typically am pretty disconnected to what's actually coming out of my mouth. I'm not sure if I'm staying on track. I'm not sure how I feel when the curtain comes down or the silence and, on the drive home is a little more deafening than I would like. Those are really great indicators for people to feel and maybe wonder, am I code switching? Am I having to change who I am in one space to another? And am I performing? And if so,
Well, I think it's so helpful to dive into, and I'm curious from your take and your perspective on this, if because probably everyone can relate to that. I know I can relate to that, and sometimes I get it as a speaker. It's like someone says, "Hey, can you come in and speak on this or that?" And you're like, "Ah, it's not really my zone of genius. It's not what I love." Or a client asks you to coach them on something that's not your zone of genius. Are you proposing that we should be saying no to opportunities that aren't soul aligned? And we'll unpack more of your framework here as we go. But are you proposing that that's an indication, okay, we're misaligned with what we're doing and we should be saying no to those things? Or is there a different solution or a different path?
that's a great question. I think it's pretty situational, actually, because for those who are growth minded and your energy is such that you always want to stretch and you want to grow around your edges, I would never suggest somebody say no necessarily to an opportunity that is adjacent to what you already know and are good at. But for those who maybe already feel stretched, or maybe you're already in a growth mindset in a different facet of your life, or maybe you just don't have the energy to feel excited around an opportunity that isn't soul aligned or super aligned with what you're doing. Those are times when I think it is better to just be honest first with yourself and have self empathy and compassion, right? And say, okay, I have some other priorities that are really requiring more of me, or I don't feel particularly growth minded around this topic, or I don't think I'm going to show up at my best. And then that's a brand issue.
Mm.
Those are all times when I think it does make a lot of sense to step to the side and really reconsider your time and the return on the investment of your time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tell us about, so I'm very curious about this framework that
Mhm.
you've developed, the unicorn leader framework, and it's a great name,
Yes.
by the way. So, um, I know that it emphasizes traits like empathy, like authenticity, but I'd love if you could start by sharing for someone who hasn't read your book or isn't familiar with your work, what does that framework include and entail?
Thank you so much. I love that you said it's a great name because, I was floating the idea of Unicorn Leader as a name at a conference. It'll be a year ago in April. So a year ago in a couple weeks. And people were literally like, "Oh, no, no, you should not go into the business world with anything called Unicorn Leader. It sounds really fluffy. That sounds like a gift I would give my granddaughter who's like 7." I got a lot of feedback and it was great feedback and I needed to hear it because what it ultimately had me do was move from just this idea of being a unicorn leader, which I'd always been called, to creating a framework to give some data and some substance behind the name. And so I'm grateful for the feedback that these people shared with me because really in essence when I moved my ego out of the way and could hear what they were saying, "Hey, I hear you, but it doesn't really sound seriously serious enough to be taken seriously in the business context." And
Mhm.
so I really built the framework around the fact that unicorn is an acronym for unique, nimble, nurturing, inspiring, compassionate, optimistic, resilient, and noble. And so the framework itself is a high EQ sales and leadership framework that emphasizes empathy and authenticity and how these traits actually influence quite a bit mindset and performance. And so it's not a weakness. Empathy certainly is not. It's actually a leadership multiplier, is how I've looked at it. The sales leaders who I coach and who lead with empathy consistently outperform those who manage by metrics alone. And then you have the fact that when you have empathy and when you learn how to lead in a high EQ way, you're incredibly authentic. And
Mm.
that authenticity is what builds trust. And trust, I believe, is what builds belief and drives belief. And the belief in somebody or something they're offering is what actually closes a deal.
I think that's important. The belief in someone and what they're offering is what closes a deal. If you're ready to quantum leap, I've got something great for you. Inside my 10K club, I teach the Superhuman Selling framework, which is the mindset and strategy that's helped both me and my clients exponentially increase our income while also experiencing more joy, peace, and alignment than ever before. You can apply today at elisearcher.com/10K club. I was listening to you talk about the traits, and I think they're all powerful and needed. And what I'm curious about is I'm guessing for our particular audience, because they tend to be highly emotionally aware, they tend to be highly evolved in this area.
Yes.
Um, I'm wondering if there's almost another side of it where someone may really embody all of those traits and they're stepping into leadership and there's maybe more discomfort around the management or around the metrics or how do I still embody these qualities but hold people accountable?
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear what you would say to someone who's maybe on the other side of that spectrum and how
Sure.
we can continue to have those qualities but also be comfortable having the difficult conversations or driving results.
Yeah. Well, that's such a great question. And that is something that I constantly have from a discussion standpoint with executives, mostly wealth management firms, financial services, because that's really where my background comes from, sales coaching and financial services and wealth management firms. And a lot of times, they struggle with the idea that empathy and execution can coexist. One of the things I often say, and people chuckle, is I promise you, Elise, these people in wealth management and financial services would have rather seen me show up and embezzle money or break into the vault than bring a feelings wheel into the executive suite, right? Like, I am not kidding. They were so, so, so uncomfortable, and they just could not wrap their minds in the beginning around this idea that empathy and execution can coexist. And so the issues that I ran into there were people who were not highly self-aware. And so the good news is for people who are highly self-aware, all you have to really learn to do is to step into the discomfort of sharing uncomfortable feedback. Because since you already have IQ and since or EQ and IQ, right? Since you already have those traits, all you need to do is figure out, how do I communicate critically and curiously and non-judgmentally with this person I'm sitting across from. And since I'm already a high EQ leader, I'm going to be able to discern whether the person across from me is driven by one of these three principles that Daniel Pink talks about all the time: mastery, autonomy, or purpose. All of us are driven by those things, one more importantly or more emphatically than the other at any point in time. So for me right now, I'm driven by mastery. I want to
Yeah.
master this space. I want to master keynote speaking. I want to master providing workshops. I want to master thought leadership. So if somebody who was high EQ wanted to have a conversation with me and it was more of an execution conversation and, hey, how are we going to boost results or whatever the case might be, if they really focused on opportunities for me to continue to grow my mastery, since that's my internal driving factor right now, I would be super open to that conversation. But if they focused instead on autonomy, like let's say back in the olden days, when I didn't have any autonomy and I was a manager, I was really driven by autonomy. I just wanted people to leave me the hell alone and let me do my job, right? So a lot of salespeople can understand that. But if I was driven by autonomy and instead this leader or this salesperson came to me and wanted to talk about continuing education, skill development, would you like some executive coaching? Do you think that's going to attract me or repel me if I'm driven by autonomy? So we are driven by one of these three things more so than others at any point in time. And as soon as high EQ leaders and salespeople figure out what their prospect, client, or employee is driven by, it's game over.
Interesting. I've never heard it so I haven't read the book, obviously. Haven't heard it positioned that way, but it makes total sense. How do we is there a quick way to discern or to tell
Yeah.
who people are leading, like, what they're driven by?
Yeah, absolutely. So the people who are driven by autonomy, they're going to present in a way that it's like, okay, I will, you don't need to check up on me all the time. Or could this have just been an email instead of a meeting? Or do we really need to have a one on one so often? Can I not just send you my pipeline report and let that be it? Those are people who are driven by autonomy. Basically, what they're saying is, I just only want to hear from you when you have a check for me or you're trying to tell me how to get a deal done. Right?
Yep.
So, the people who are driven by purpose, those are people who are absolutely always talking about the mission, the values, the why behind what we do. And for a long time, I was really driven by purpose when I first started my own business, right? This is the why. I experienced painful, hurtful things in corporate America. And so I was so purpose driven. Most of my posts, most of my conversations really talked about changing and it being a type of generational wealth to change leadership in corporate America. Right. And so people who are driven by mastery are going to say things like, hey, do we do any type of executive coaching around here? Do you have any book recommendations? Hey, I don't really feel like you gave me a lot of actionable feedback in our last one on one session. These are people who are really driven by mastery and are telling you that in order for them to respect you and want to win as a leader or as a prospect, you got to speak to those intrinsic driving factors.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, so a follow-up on that. So for those of us who are leading
Mhm.
others, if we are dr I think here's the question. Can we be a successful leader of others, supportive of our team, and personally be driven by autonomy? Not wanna have a ton of meetings, not wanna be or is that kinda leaving the team hanging and not
Yes.
being available the way that you should be? I'm really curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think so many things can coexist. Now, I did just get off of
Mhm.
beyond the binary training, right? Where I taught a whole entire room how to rewire their mindset so they didn't think in either or. And so my answer is absolutely. I am very often very driven by autonomy. I don't want things to slow me down. I'm also neurodiverse. I'm ADHD. And so I'm a systems thinker. I'm all about efficiency. I don't like waiting. I certainly don't like waiting and then having to redo something. And so I'm very much driven by autonomy. And those things can change at different points, like I said, in your career or in the relationships that you have. I think the important thing to note is while you're driven by autonomy, if you're a leader, you have to speak to what's driving the individual on your team that you're coaching, right?
Mm,
Your
mhm.
boss, if you have one, whether it's a board of directors, whether it's a VC firm, whatever, they need to understand that you're driven by autonomy. And then also you got to make sure those goals are in alignment for, the positionality of the organization.
Okay, got it. Thank you, because 'cause I'm even personally reflecting here, and I know I'm a woman who's highly driven by autonomy, and that's been something that transparently has come up as
Yes.
we have built our team and brought more people on, and so sometimes there can be almost this sense of inner conflict of, like, of course, I want everyone to be succeeding and thriving, and I don't love meetings just to have meetings. I don't
Yes.
wanna I don't wanna be having unnecessary conversations, and I love my team, and I support my team, and I think they're amazing, so sometimes there's been an inner conflict, and I hear you saying there's a way to do both,
Yeah.
and the most important thing is to know what drives the team that you're leading and speak to them in their language and make sure communicating to them in the lens of what matters the most.
Yes, absolutely. And if there's a misalignment, right? That's okay. But because you're high EQ and because the majority of the people that work with high EQ people are also have a fair degree of self-awareness and situational intelligence, you will be able to have a really rich dialogue, even if there is some moments of discomfort, because we
Mm.
recognize, right, that that's when we grow through our edges is really when we get to the place that we're absolutely performing lights out.
I love this, and you mentioned before that you're very focused on training mindset. We do a lot around, mindset rewiring and belief rewiring in our programs, and I know everyone has different approach to this and kind of a different method that I don't believe there's a one size fits all
Mhm.
approach to it, but I'm curious your take on this. Do you see one common self-sabotaging pattern that maybe even experienced sales leaders fall into in terms of their thoughts and their beliefs?
I do see a pattern that typically most of my clients tend to present. And a lot of times they don't even know what it is. They just see that it's repeating at each place they go. And typically that pattern is, I call it, and it's commonly referred to, tallest poppy syndrome, right? It's where you're a shiny star, you're a tall poppy amongst a field of other flowers, and ultimately, what brings you into a space and people are super excited about quickly turns into something where you're starting to feel sidelined, or you're starting to feel, maybe that you're out of place. And it tends to come from putting ourselves in places that want us to be smaller than who we actually are. And so we spend
Mm.
our energy focusing on being small enough or digestible enough or not too shiny, and this creates a massive misalignment. And honestly, all of that starts with emotional honesty. A lot of high achievers are incredible at execution, Elise, like absolutely incredible, but freaking disconnected from their own emotional cues. And so the
Mm.
mindset shift, it doesn't happen in your Google Calendar. It happens in the quiet moments on your way home, in your quiet moments before you hit the hay at night. Who am I actually doing this for? And if the answer isn't you, yourself, and you, then it's time to recalibrate, because that
Mm.
is yet another sign that you're performing, like we talked about earlier in the show, and then that you're disconnected from what you actually truly want to be doing. And like I said, for most of the women who come find me, it's they're trying to remain small in a space that they can never be small enough.
And that could be a whole nother I mean, it really could, and I think it's such an important conversation and something probably many of us can relate to even outside
Mhm,
of business. If we just look at circles that we've maybe outgrown or places we put ourselves into or feeling like we have to perform. And I think the question that you asked there, that you poised there for someone to ask of who am I doing this for can be a very sobering question to ask.
mhm,
And I there have been multiple times in my career where I realized I was building something or doing something because it's what I thought I should be doing,
mhm,
and, we're never in our full power when we're doing that, and it's taken courage to be willing in those moments to kind of pause and say, "What do I really want?"
mhm,
What especially for those of us, I think, who are empathetic, who do care a lot about other people. One of my experiences with leading and growing a team is I would be so concerned about making sure that everybody else was okay
mhm,
and getting their needs met that sometimes I didn't know how to also meet my own needs
mhm.
with that, and so that's there's been a lot of learning and growth, and I think I've, always got more to learn there, but have definitely done some deep work on that. But to come back to, who am I really doing this for? What do we do if we find out? Like, if someone does that, like, "Oh my gosh, this is completely misaligned." Like, maybe the company I'm building, the role I'm in, the team, whatever it is, what would you say to someone who asks that question and they realize they're completely out of alignment?
Yeah. Well, the first thing again is I just start with awareness is so critical. And so for somebody who comes to that conclusion and they're like, "Oh gosh, I'm already halfway down this path." I very much felt that way in the C-suite. I felt that way the job before when I was leading a $30 billion bank. I knew that I was not living in my full purpose. And for me, that was being free to talk about emotional cues, honesty, needs, emotional intelligence through the lens of how that helps people show up. And so, what I had to do was really decide, okay, I've lived the first 43 years of my life really doing a lot for everyone else. I've got 3 kids ranging from 17 to 12, a marriage of 20 something years. I just thought to myself, maybe I'll spend the next 43 years of my life doing for me and what is truly in alignment with me. And that is scary. And you said something about courage. And I often tell people confidence is not courage. They're not the same thing. I was a highly confident woman in business, right?
Mm.
But I didn't have the courage for a year and a half. Now I stand in full authentic authority. I've built a whole entire program around it. I teach people how to do it every single day, become the thought leader, sell differently, lead differently, brand differently, all through this lens. And I stand in full authentic authority. But that's because the courage came by doing it afraid.
Mm. Wow. Wow.
Right? Do
Yeah.
it afraid. That's how you build courage. And then that confidence literally spews out of me no matter what space I'm in. And the cool thing, Elise, is if that attracts you or repels you,
Yeah.
I'm just happy you had a reaction.
Yes. Yes. And I think underneath that too is we have to have the belief that we can make the courageous choice, make the uncomfortable choice, and still be safe and still be okay. And that, in fact, by doing that, to me, one of the things that I've come to believe, and it's come from a lot of moments of not trusting myself, but every time I trust myself and make the choice based on what feels most in alignment, for what I know and for where I'm going, that is where I thrive the most. That is where I am most successful, even if I can't see the full path yet, and even if it involves disentangling some stuff that's no longer aligned. So, um, wow, powerful. I wanna ask you, so we've got just some short rapid fire kind of fill in the blanks questions. I think this is a fun way to get in your mind in a quick and accessible way and have share. I love it. We've been in for the whole episode. I'm loving it. I think it's amazing. But so I'm going to ask you a series of a couple of questions. Just I'm going to start a sentence. I'm going to have you fill in the blanks at the end, just with whatever comes to mind first. You ready? All right. So first one, you can't lead a team if you don't.
Trust yourself first.
Awesome. Okay. Number two, the leadership team that you used to, or excuse me, the leadership trait that you used to overlook, but now you live by is what?
Unique.
Mm, unique. I love that. I love that. Okay, third one. The moment you knew you had to leave differently was when what?
Oh, I showed up to a meeting with vomit still in my hair because I was afraid of my boss.
Ooh. Too afraid to take the time to go get yeah, yeah. Wow. Many of us can relate to some sort of moment like that. But yeah, that I could see that being a sobering moment.
Yes, it was. I was like, "What the hell is going on here? You are a grown woman. Whoa."
No hashtag mom life here, like, no, like, this is just it's a realignment opportunity is what it is, right? And then okay, so final 2, playing small looks like
Ooh, making yourself digestible, for people who really don't want you there anyway.
ooh, I love that. Making yourself digestible for people who don't really want you there anyway. So the flip side, playing big looks like what?
Oh, that's authentic authority, baby, right? That is like, listen, I know who I am. I know what drives me. And you know what? I wish you well, whether you like me or you don't. It's really not my business.
I love that, and that's when we're in our full power. Um, this has been such a fun conversation. And I think that there was so much that we touched on, that's gonna help those who are either leaders or aspiring leaders, but also the common thread throughout of being in full alignment with yourself and no longer choosing to downplay or minimize to fit in the rooms with the people who don't really want you there in the first place or who more than likely you've outgrown as well. So, wow, Christy, tell everyone how can they connect with you? How can they learn more about your work and what you do? And get plugged into your community if they would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active. It's Kristi Straw on LinkedIn. I also have a LinkedIn live show called The Last Straw. So that's super easy to remember. And feel free, shoot me a note. I'd love to see everybody and have a chat.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate this. This has been a conversation that I personally have learned so much from. And that to me is always a beautiful experience to get to share your wisdom and your expertise with the community while also getting to learn myself. So thank you again
Yes, yes,
for
for
taking the
sure.
time, for being here, and for modeling what it looks like to unapologetically take up space and also really own who you are, own your gifts, and then inspire others to do the same. To you, my listener, thank you so much for being here, for being part of the Superhuman Selling community. And I just want to remind you as we close to trust yourself on your path to success. Your desires are green lights leading you and everyone around you to a brighter future. I'll see you on the next episode.